Welcome to Paying Attention. I'm Brent Beasley. I lead the Fort Worth Education Partnership, and we are continuing our conversation today with Pete Geren. Pete leads the Sid Richardson Foundation and has for almost 16 years, the last 16 years. Yeah. So Pete, Sid Richardson, the foundation is a central institution in Fort Worth. Can you talk about first who Sid Richardson was? Some of us who went to college in Texas knew we had buildings called Sid Richardson. I had one at Baylor, the Sid Richardson building. But who was Sid Richardson, and then what the foundation is and what the foundation does?
Mm-hmm. Well, Sid Richardson was one of the truly legendary Texas Wildcatters. He grew up in East Texas with not much. His dad had a cafe, a bar, and they also ran a little farming operation. And in Sid Richardson, from very early days, he did not have a great education, but he showed himself to be a trader early on, and he would buy a cow and trade a cow, and started making money earlier as a trader, and went off and started trading oil leases, and ended up becoming one of the most successful wildcatters in Texas history. But he was a wildcatter to his dying days. He used to joke, "I've been broke so often, I was worried it was going to be habit forming." But he never married, and he recognized that his life was limited, perhaps in some ways, because he didn't have a great education himself. And from his earliest days, as sharing his wealth with the state, he invested with colleges all over the state, in Abilene and Houston and Waco and Fort Worth, Sherman. So many of the mid-sized colleges in Texas have a Sid Richardson building. And so he was committed to education. Mentioned he was a bachelor till the day he died. He left most of his wealth to create the Sid Richardson Foundation for the people of Texas, and gave some guidance beyond that. But by and large, it was for the people of Texas, with education from its very beginning as its top priority. And his nephew, Perry Bass, carried on that legacy. And Perry Bass had 4 sons, and all 4 of those sons chose to live in Fort Worth. 3 of them are the board members for this foundation, but their personal philanthropy and their civic leadership has done, I would say, other than Amon Carter, there's been no family that's done more to improve the quality of life and give opportunity and meet the needs of the neediest in our community than has that family and this foundation. Very generous with their time, with their resources, and very committed to this community, and they continue to make a difference.
Yeah, and I think he was 68 when he died in 1959, and here, all these years later, the legacy continues. And I know Sid Richardson Foundation is heavily involved in education support. It's the number one priority, but gives broadly to all the organizations and individuals in Fort Worth who are doing great work across multiple
health and human services. Yeah. And let me mention something about when he died. He died in 59, as you noted. And Sid Richardson had lived his business career with deals based on handshakes. And it took 5 years to actually settle his estate and get the assets into the foundation, because he had so many handshake deals. Right. And the original secretary for the foundation was John Conley. Oh. So John Conley had my job.
Really?
A long time ago. But it took him 5 years to go around and examine the commitments, the claims, and decide whether there was actually a deal there or not. But they were very generous in settling the claims. And finally, they got it untangled enough, and it went to this foundation.
Very interesting. You had quite a career before doing this. You were a U.S. congressman representing Fort Worth in Washington, the seat that Craig Goldman has now. Kay Granger followed you. Knowing you, I can see you wanting to be involved in public service, but there are some things about running for office, and maybe I'm reflecting on the current political climate more, but that I could see you not enjoying as much. But I'd love to hear how you ended up actually running for office, and then what you liked about that and what you found challenging about that.
Well, the climate has changed so much. I what people are subjected to that run for office, that serve in office. It's the experience I had that many years ago. It's just night and day. I don't know how people that have put themselves up are able to endure this kind of bloodthirsty, cutthroat politics, and that's got to change. It just can't go on. But we thought it was getting tough in the 90s. In fact, I ran for an open seat that was created when Jim Wright was forced to resign. And that was when the ugliness in the House began. And many people thought that was the demarcation point from the pre-Wright era and the post-Wright era. And then there was a bloody slugfest in the Senate over the John Tower nomination. And since then, both bodies have had much more partisan politics dominating them than we had previously. When I was there, we had a lot of bipartisan legislation. When President Clinton was president, we passed bipartisan legislation, a crime bill, NAFTA, welfare reform, balanced budget. And those were all passed with bipartisan support. You don't see that at all anymore. So it was a different era.
I mean, you were part of a group of centrist Republicans and Democrats, which we don't really have any kind of group like that today that I can think of.
We founded, I was one of the 3 founders of the Blue Dog Democrats.
Okay.
And they were centrist Democrats. And our group would often be the swing group of voters. So many of the Clinton initiatives would lose the people on the far right and the far left, and the moderates and centrists in both parties would get to 218 votes, and that's all it takes to pass a bill.
Yeah.
So it was a very different era.
Yeah.
And I know we'll get through this somehow. It's a strong country and a strong democracy, but people of goodwill need to step forward and be a part of the process and not be shouted into the corners and off the stage.
Yeah. You sent me an article the other day that was from the governor from Utah, Cox, I believe, that talked about we need more architects and fewer arsonists in today's political environment.
I love that. And Governor Cox achieved national fame after the Charlie Kirk murder. And his call for a peaceful response to that and self-examination and not arson. It was interesting, well received by a lot of people, but he was harshly criticized by people in his own party, including senior executive branch officials, for taking a stand like that principled stand. So we've got to support people like him.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And the hers out there that are willing to stand up to the arsonists.
Right. To learn more about Fort Worth Education Partnership, check out our website, fortworthep.org. And we are on Instagram at FortWorthEP. I wanted to talk about your role at the Pentagon as well. You can tell us what roles you had, because you had several, but you ended up being Secretary of the Army. And back to what we were just talking about bipartisan, you served under George W. Bush and Obama for a time, which seems, at least in this time, an unusual situation. So love to hear kind of the roles you had there and also that experience as Secretary of the Army.
Well, I went into the Pentagon early in the first year of President Bush's first term, and I was the only Democrat appointed in the administration, and later other Democrats joined the administration. So he approached governing with a bipartisan perspective, as he did when he was governor of Texas. My second week on the job was 9/11, and the work that we had planned and that Secretary Rumsfeld had planned for the Pentagon had to do with acquisition reform and civil service reform, and really an internal focus. And then when 9/11 happened, of course, everything changed. And the focus was fighting the wars.
Can you talk about that actual day? Because you were at the Pentagon that day. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I was, that day we planned a large press event in the Pentagon cafeteria, and Secretary Rumsfeld was going to announce this major civil service reform, unprecedented in scope. That was going to be at noon, and we had worked to be prepared for that. And another colleague and I had been the people that had really put together that day and the planning for that day for this big announcement. And I was in a breakfast with Secretary Rumsfeld that morning with members of Congress, including Kay Granger was in that meeting. And I'll never forget this, because he talked with them about how the Pentagon did need to transform, and he used the term asymmetric threats. I had never heard that term, and I really didn't know what he was talking about. And of course, now people throw the term around. But somebody in the audience asked him, well, talk about that. And he said, well, asymmetric threats are people attacking you in ways you never could expect, using things that you don't even think of as weapons. And that was really the focus of the conversation. And then Colonel Bucci, his military aide, walked in and tapped him on the shoulder and said, Secretary Rumsfeld, or he whispered, we couldn't hear. But he told him about the plane crashing into the Pentagon, and Secretary Rumsfeld said, been a terrible accident in New York, and I've got to go check on it. And
the plane crashing into the World Trade Center.
Yeah. And so he got up and left, and we continued to visit. And then a few minutes later, maybe 15 minutes later, they came back in and said a second plane has hit the World Trade Center. It's a terrorist attack. And then, of course, everybody split up and went their way. My office was a few doors down, and I walked into my office and my phone rang, and it was my brother, and he said, what's going on? And I said, well, you probably know more than I do. You've been watching television. I've just been in a breakfast. And he said, you wonder if they're attacking major American landmarks. I wonder if they'd attack the Pentagon. And then just a few minutes later, the building shook. Wow. And wow, the world changed for everybody.
Yeah. And changed, as you alluded to, everything that you probably would have been doing in that role and all that y'all were doing, and everything shifted into something different.
It did. We still tried to push through civil service reform, but everything took a back seat. And to try to change we were ready for Russia and pretty ready for China, but we weren't ready for asymmetric threats. Mm-hmm. And Rumsfeld famously said, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you have. So much of what the big push was, how do we transform overnight to meet threats like this? And the terrorist network was much better organized and had advanced technology beyond what we could bring to the battlefield. So people were just driving the system as hard as they could to make the kind of changes that we needed to get soldiers in theater and defeat the Al-Qaeda, defeat the Taliban. And it was a period of radical transformation, more in how we fight wars, mm-hmm. and then an effort to, as well, on acquisition and civil service reform.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit about your time as Secretary of the Army and just what that means to you, or what that mm-hmm. meant to you, and how that impacted you, that experience? Because you came from a civilian, you didn't come from a military background, right?
No, and by the time I was Under Secretary of the Army and then Secretary of the Army. At that point, the Army was under tremendous stress. We're getting a lot of soldiers killed and badly injured. What actually led my predecessor to getting fired was the Army military health system was overwhelmed by casualties. Anticipation that it would have been a short war, and so we really didn't staff up as we should have or build the resources into the medical system, and the system was overwhelmed. And my predecessor did not prioritize it in a way that then Secretary Gates thought he should have, and he asked him to step down and asked me to become secretary. So it was an Army where the military was stressed to deliver the number of troops. Families were under tremendous stress. It's really the first war we fought with a largely married force. Over 50% of the soldiers are married now. All the wars we fought previously have been fought with largely conscripts. And go back to World War II, if you tried to, you couldn't re-enlist if you were married. The system wasn't built. So much of our work was trying to make the Army and a war work for military families. A lot of work on health care. Recruiting, by that point, the war had gotten unpopular, but recruiting was very hard. The country by then was divided, and the job of the Secretary of the Army is organize, train, and equip, and that all begins with recruiting. So recruiting, training, and getting soldiers, the rest of the service, the sailor and Marines, prepared to deploy and fight in a different way than generations before had fought wars.
We talked a lot in the last episode about public education, and working on public education involves working with large public bureaucracies, and which is what school districts are. And just thinking about your experience working at the Pentagon, which is one of the largest bureaucracies in the world, like what have you learned about how to accomplish things working in these kind of big systems?
Well, one of the first things I learned about education, and this was the first glimpse I had of the inadequate preparation of 18-year-olds for what comes next in life. For males, only about 25% of males in the United States, 18-year-old males, qualify to join the Army. Very few people realize that, but the 25% that industry wants is the same 25% that the Army wants. Most of them can't pass the standardized test that it takes to join the Army. In some cases, it's health, but in many cases, they call it the ASVAB test. They can't pass the test. And so literacy, I learned then, was a national security issue. But I just, until then, had no appreciation for how widespread it was and what a challenge it was for the Army, because we were having to recruit from a very small pool. But I also saw there how hard it is to change a very large bureaucracy. And it's not necessarily for bad reasons. The people that work in very large government organizations wake up every morning, feel called to do their work, they go to work, but they pretty much do the same thing day after day after day after day. And to change anything, it isn't a question of changing one person's mind, it's changing thousands of people's minds. You would have any program of any size, didn't just require persuading the leader of that program something was a good idea, but she had to persuade 5, and the 5 had to persuade 100, and the 100 had to persuade 10,000, the 10,000 had to persuade 100,000. And if the system, if you don't have connect at any point along the way, change breaks down. And people that work in government tend to be more risk averse, career-wise, and it's just very resistant to change. And what I saw there in the civil service reform that I also worked on directly before going to the Army, I saw how hard that was to change compensation, promotion, transfer systems. Just, they're so deeply embedded, and it rocks the boat in a profound way, in a personal way. And so I brought that awareness, and you've got to respect these large government agencies and organizations. You have to respect them. They're good people trying to do a good job. And if you go in there thinking anything other than that, you're dead on day one. You got to respect the organization. You have to embrace their commitment. But the change is slow. And the communication to that organization, to that governmental entity, it best comes from the people that they serve. Parents, civic leaders, people who have a stake in the productivity of that. And that's a model that we're following here.
Back to what we talked about in the last episode about public sentiment and democracy. You really have to have the people support.
One of the organizations that FWEP has started, Fort Worth Families Forward, and it brings parents into the political process, not to lobby, but just to share information and meet with city council members and other community leaders. They'll have 50, 60, 70 parents meet with a city council member. I can promise you, as a recovering politician, that makes a difference on that politician. And it should, and it does. And they can get a call here and a call there, but when people take the time to go and sit down with a council member or a member of Congress or a state rep, and you can turn out dozens, it makes an impact. And that's how you change government. And Fort Worth Families Forward is a great example of a grassroots organization changing public education in Fort Worth through parent advocacy.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that.
To learn more about today's guest, Pete Geren, and the Sid Richardson Foundation, check out their website, sidrichardson.org. And you can connect via email, info@sidrichardson.org.
So we've been talking about all these different things that you've been a part of in your life, from the Sid Richardson Foundation to the Pentagon to Congress. And I just wonder if you can think about how all of those different things have sort of woven together to inform, your passion now, what you're doing with your life now.
Mm-hmm. Two experiences in my life that best prepared me for this literacy work and this public education work. One was not when I was in elected office, and most of my life I never imagined I would be in elective office, but I was a longtime volunteer for people who were running for elective office and was a community organizer. I had a full-time day job, but I invested a lot of my time in working in the campaigns for other people, and was the county campaign manager for Senator Lloyd Benson when he was running for re-election. But before that, I'd worked for a gubernatorial candidate, an attorney general candidate. So I'd worked in the neighborhood, and I knew what it took. And of course, this was another era before the internet, but saw what effective community organizing looked like and what neighborhood leadership looked like, and saw the importance of that and saw how it could make a difference. Elected office came in many ways by surprise to me, and certainly that helped me broaden my awareness of this community and what this community needs and what the state needs. But really the second was serving in a very large government agency, and the lessons I learned about large government agencies and the civil servants that fill those government agencies. So I learned to appreciate democracy as a volunteer, and learned to appreciate how hard governmental change is by working in the world's largest government agency. So thinking back when I was approached by a headhunter for this job, and I knew by reputation the Bass family's philanthropy. They liked their leader of their philanthropy to be involved in the community. I think that's why they reached out to me and not to a career foundation person. Mm-hmm. So going into it, I knew that my experience in public life was important to the job that they imagined for me. But I didn't really appreciate till we started working in literacy and how stubborn the system was. And without going into too much detail, I spent my first year going to a lot of education conferences and philanthropy and this idea and that idea. And this was the golden age for philanthropic engagement in public education, the mid 2008, 2010, 2012. Mm-hmm. And tremendous amounts of money were going into philanthropy. The Facebook founder put $100 million into one school district. And I was very optimistic that that's how you're going to change it. You know, a great idea from the outside with a great big check. And it wasn't long before I realized that that just wasn't working at all. Just was not moving the needle, wasn't budging the Leviathan that is public education. And that's when I started drawing on these other experiences. I thought, well, this isn't anything new. This is politics. You change government from the grassroots up. You change large government agencies by engaging in the process. And philanthropy's a key part of it. But philanthropy tends to ignore all these other aspects. One of our big goals for us is to try to really expand the role of the city of Fort Worth. This problem is so big, schools are never going to be able to do it on their own. And my work in politics gave me a sense of how you can work with a city. And one of the programs the city started that really came about as a result of the work you and I do together is in the summer, they're screening kids for dyslexia in their summer camps. So I know that my experience in and out of government, but around government, helped me realize the potential for those types of partnerships. So it's helped a lot, and frankly, more than I had expected it to.
Yeah. I think all of us who know you see that thread of public service with integrity running through, you know, all of these things that we've talked about, and really grateful to you for that. And thanks for spending the time with me today to do this podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, and the partnership and the friendship I have with you, and the people that have joined us. You know, we've got so many wonderful volunteer leaders, and we both know this will only work if we help leaders to grow, and we've got some extraordinary leaders that are emerging, that are making a difference in this community.
Yeah.
So thanks for your partnership, and above all, thanks for your friendship.
Yeah, thank you. This is a Fort Worth Education Partnership production. To watch Paying Attention, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to Paying Attention wherever you get your podcasts.